Hi, I'm Chet Haas, an engineer on the Android team at Google. Today I'm going to do another show in a series I like to call You're Doing It Wrong. Now, the demo you're going to see is not code that I would like you to copy and paste. In fact, it is code that I would like you to not copy and paste. Don't do what I'm doing today. Instead, it's a hacked up demo to show an egregious example of something that I have seen commonly in other applications. And usually the effect is more subtle. And being subtle, it takes a long time for me to track down the problem. But it all boils down to one single problem that a lot of applications share, which is don't call request layout during layout. And let's take a look at the demo, and then I'll talk a little bit about why this is a really bad thing for your application to do and a good thing for your application to avoid. So first of all, we have this demo. I have three simple buttons there. There's an add and a remove button, and then a layout button. When I click add, it's going to add a button to the container, so that button should appear below. When I remove, it's going to remove the first button in that container if said button exists. And the layout calls request layout on the container itself, so it basically forces a layout. So first I'll click add, and nothing happened. But you'll see, actually something did happen. It's just that there was no visual change to the activity. So if I call request layout forcibly on the container, you can now see, oh, well, that button actually was there. We just weren't seeing it. Again, I can call add again, add another button, and in fact, I have to call request layout to actually see the button. I can keep doing this over and over again, and each time we actually add a button, but nothing happens. Similarly, I can click on the remove, and a button disappears, but the container actually should have shrunk around it, and that simply didn't happen. So if I call request layout, the right thing happens. Again, click remove, the button goes away, but the right visual thing didn't happen. So let's take a look at the code, and then let's chat about what's actually going on. So here's my hacked up demo. And again, this is not necessarily the instantiation of what I have seen in applications, but they all boil down to essentially this logic, which is request layouts are getting called somewhere, either directly or indirectly, during the middle of the layout process, and that is the root of the problem. So in this particular hacky demo, we have click listeners on the buttons. For the add view button, we set a flag that says, hey, I'd like you to add a view, and then we call request layout on that layout where we're going to add the view. Remove button, similarly, we set a flag that says, hey, I'd like you to remove one of your views, and then we call request layout. And then finally, the layout button forces a layout by calling request layout on that container, and that sort of restores the state that we thought the container should have been in when we did the add and remove operations. Here's the custom container. It has those couple of flags in it, and then it has this onLayout override. So onLayout is a standard override from the view class. So if you would like to do something special in your layout, for instance, linear layout overrides onLayout, and that's where it actually lays out its children horizontally or vertically to position them appropriately on the screen before returning from onLayout. So in here, we say, okay, if there's a remove request pending, then we're going to call this method that says remove button, and then all we're going to do is remove the first child if that child exists. And if there's an add request pending, then we're going to add a button, and then we're going to reset the flag. And adding a button simply creates this button along the way, sets the layout parameters accordingly, sets some text on there so we know which button it is, and then we add the view. So the actual code to remove and add these views and set the properties and the layout params on all the views, all of that's correct. The problem is that we're doing it in onLayout. We're basically in the middle of laying out the entire view hierarchy, or some subset of it that needed to be laid out, and that's the time when we actually call functions to add and remove views, which are going to affect the layout itself. So it's kind of a recursive problem where we're in the middle of doing something and we change properties that will side effect the thing that we are trying to do. In particular, and here's the crux of the problem, we're in the middle of laying out the container. And so, for instance, we call super.onLayout. That's going to call up into the code in linear layout that figures out where all the children should be. And then we're going to go ahead and add or remove children after that call. And when layout is done for any particular node in the view hierarchy, it's going to clear some flags saying, I'm done with layout. So what's going to happen is we're going to either add or remove views in this code, and then we're going to return back to the superclass, the actual layout call on the view, and the view is going to say, okay, I'm done with the layout. and then it continues along with its life. Meanwhile, these guys have been added here and they have not had the proper side effect on the sizing and positioning information of that view. So they have requested layout, which is a side effect of calling add or remove view, but that request didn't propagate because we're already in the middle of doing layout and figured we were done when we finished that layout call. So there are many different ways to do this. I have in this demo picked probably the worst way to do it. The easiest way for you to actually do this correctly in this particularly hacky demo is, well, instead of actually setting a flag and then forcing this thing to happen within layout, the correct thing to do would actually be, for example, to call my layout.add button directly in that code. Get rid of these horribly offensive lines of code. Similarly, a remove button, you could call my layout.remove button and get rid of this hacky approach to doing it. Now this is rather obvious. As I said, this is a hacky demo that shows the most obvious example of this. But we've seen other things that are quite similar to this where in the middle of someone's measurement or layout code, someone goes ahead and does things that is side affecting the stuff that the entire view hierarchy is in the middle of dealing with. You will see an approach to this in list view and adapter view and some of the internal classes, and I've seen some custom classes that do things similarly externally, where the correct approach, if you really for some reason need to do this in the middle of that code, say you're a list view and you're recycling views and things do get added and removed during layout, one of the things you should keep in mind is that there are add view during layout, add view in layout, and remove view in layout. These are the methods to call if you're actually doing these things during the middle of layout. But the most important thing to remember is when you finish layout, all of the measurement and layout information for that container should be done. It should be complete, which means if you're adding children during the middle of layout, you need to make sure that your measurement information and that of your children is all correct by the time you return from layout, because that's what the rest of the view hierarchy expects. So don't do it like I did it. Actually do it correctly instead, and don't do this stuff during layout. Or if you do it the correct way and make sure that when your layout for your container finishes, everything below it is handled correctly so that the view hierarchy is in a consistent state with your container. Thanks.